Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm recreating two of my old videos. Back in the day, my channel was known as Learn to Draw Manga. My channel mainly revolved around tutorial videos. However, over time my content started to change, so I changed my name to Love to Draw Manga. I don't do tutorials very often now, and we'll talk about why in a bit, but many of you often request that I remake my old tutorial videos because I draw very differently now. On August 5th, 2013, I posted my first video. It was how to draw manga girl eye. At the time, I was 17 years old, and I didn't really know what I was doing. For one, my camera is out of focus. Also, I look super tan because I didn't know how to work the white balance. I also didn't know how to change the aspect ratio in my editing program, which is why we have so much black space around the footage. My footage was 16:9, but my editing software was 4:3. So yeah, that's why we have all of the black space. If you often watch my videos, you can probably tell that I draw eyes very differently now, and I'll walk you through my newer process step by step. The supplies I'm using are pretty basic. First, I have this pencil. It has 3B graphite, so it's a bit on the softer side and will get fairly dark. Most basic pencils are 2B or HB, so many pencils should work just fine. You don't need anything fancy. Then I have this mechanical pencil. Mechanical pencils can be nice for smaller details. That's what I often use them for. Then I have a Q-tip. I'm going to use this to smudge the graphite and blend it, but you could also use some paper towel, tissue, or your finger. However, your finger can get oils in the paper, so it's not totally recommended, but I sometimes still use my finger. I also have an eraser and my pencil sharpener. So in the original video, I'm drawing each line of the eye very systematically, I guess. However, I've never truly drawn eyes like that. I always tried to draw things line for line in my old tutorials to try to make them easier to follow, but now I feel like it's better to show you how I actually go about drawing things. So I start by very roughly defining the shape I want. In this case, we are drawing my standard girl eye shape. This is similar to Doris's eye shape, where it's very round and circular. It's kind of like a thin crescent. I draw this rough shape to give me something to build off of. It's good to start light so you can easily erase what you don't want or don't like. And once you have more of an idea of what you want to do exactly, you can start to darken things. For this kind of eye, I draw the lower lash line as a subtle curving shape that tapers at each end. I don't make the lower and upper lash lines connect, but I try to draw them in a way that they could connect. I don't want them to be misaligned. I always want to make sure they line up because if I were to be coloring the eye, I want the sclera to be able to easily line up between the lower and upper part. Next, I slightly lightened my sketch with my eraser, but then I remembered I had to sketch in the iris. In this case, and in most cases, I make the iris an oval shape. So in the first video, I kept the iris very simple. It had the pupil and a highlight. In this case, things are going to be a bit more complicated because I like to add a lot of different highlights now. I like things super shiny. I'm actually going to try to recreate my digital shading style traditionally, which I have not done before, so we'll see how this goes. Now that the basic structure is there, I'm going to clean things up. Now I am applying more pressure to the pencil to make my lines darker. Also, I made sure to sharpen my pencil again before going in with these lines. When I want nice sharp lines, I try to keep my pencil sharp. However, once I start adding shading and stuff, I don't mind if it gets kinda dull. When I'm darkening my sketch for the upper eyelash, I'm thinking about where I want it to be the thickest. Even if an eye is the same shape as another eye, it can give a very different feel depending on where it gets the thickest in the eyelash line. If I want an eye with a very round and cute feel to it, I make it the thickest at kind of the top area. If you make it thicker around the side edges, it will still look cute but have a kind of different feel to it. For the iris, I'll have it looking at us. In the original video, I made it look to one side, and the iris ended up being really wonky in shape. It's like not even an oval. When drawing the iris, I'll often make the lines around the top be thicker. I don't really do this in my digital art, but it's something I often do traditionally. It is interesting how I'll have different habits depending on if I'm drawing digitally or traditionally. For the lower lash, I'm going to make the outer edge very slightly thicker than the inner edge. I feel like it makes things a bit more dynamic compared to having the taper be exactly the same on each side. It's not super noticeable, but it's slightly there. Also, the amount of detail you put into an eye really depends on how big it is. I hardly ever draw eyes this big traditionally, so I don't often put in this much detail. So yeah, if the eyes you are drawing are small, you can add less detail. So now let's work on the inside of the iris. This is my favorite part. First, we will have the main highlight. I tend to make this highlight be a tilted oval. I always make the oval tilt so that the upper part is going towards the center of the eye, or like the upper center, if that makes sense. When working digitally, I add a lighter color to the top of the iris. To add this, traditionally, I'm going to outline a rounded square shape. I like to add this because I feel like it gives the eye a lot of dimension, and I also just think it looks cool. I do something similar along the bottom, but this one is a circle. Along the edge of the circle, I will add 2 small highlights. I erase out the sketch of the circle that's going through them. I probably could have added the smaller highlights first, but I drew the circle and then the highlights. Then I just outline the pupil. Also, you don't need to have this many highlights. Like I said, I like to make things really shiny, but a lot of times when I'm sketching or drawing small eyes, I only add this one, or sometimes I'll add these ones as well. But yeah, usually I keep my eyes a little bit more simple. Okay, so now that the iris is mapped out, I'll start to add the shading. I'm going to start by making it very dark around the rounded square shape. I'll make it dark all along the top. Once I get around the highlight area, I'll make the shading get lighter and lighter as I move down. In the first video, I applied the shading by moving my pencil back and forth, and this can make things look a bit streaky. I now apply shading in small circular motions. Moving the pencil in this way helps the shading to be smoother. I do want to mention that I'm not a fan of the paper I'm using. I've never used this paper before, but it's the only mixed media paper I had. All of my other paper is either watercolor paper or marker paper. I wanted paper that had a little bit of texture to it, but not too much. However, this paper has a lined texture on it, which makes my drawing have lines in it. So yeah, it bothers me, but not enough for me to refilm myself drawing the eye. As you can see, I've been filling in the pupil. For where the pupil is going into the rounded square, I'm going to make it lighter. Like I said, this rounded square is like another highlight, but it's not going to be white like the smaller highlights. It's just going to be lighter in color. I fill in the right side of shading and do the same thing for the lower part of the pupil. I make it lighter like the top part. Also, if you wanted to do this with color, you could. You would just need to use a variety of darker and lighter colors. Like you would apply dark blue to the top of the eye and then make the blue get lighter as you move down. If you'd like me to make a video on a colored version of this type of shading, you can let me know. Now I'm filling in the top shape with a light amount of tone. I'll gradually make this get darker as I tweak things. I'm applying a very light amount of pressure to the pencil. So now I'm going to kind of tweak things and just make things look more how I want. Also, I'll be using the Q-tip to blend things out a bit. I sometimes get questions wondering why I don't do tutorials very often now. The main reason is that for some reason I don't feel as comfortable doing them. Like when I was a smaller channel and when I was younger, I didn't mind just sharing how I did things, even if it wasn't totally correct. However, now that my channel is bigger, it feels like what I teach or share is taken a bit more seriously or has more weight to it, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. Another reason is that I'm always changing how I do things. I'm always learning new ways to do things and I'm just not super consistent. And there are so many ways to go about drawing things and stylizing things that I'm like, how do I teach that? Or should I teach multiple ways of how you stylize it? Or sometimes I do things like this and sometimes I do it like that. So that's another reason. So yeah, that's often why I don't do tutorials super often, and a lot of times they don't perform very well or aren't very popular with my viewers. Like there are some of you that do want me to do tutorials, but for me they often don't perform super well. So we'll see how this video does. To add more detail to the iris, I'm going to add some little dot shapes that'll kind of point towards the pupil. I do this with mechanical pencil because like I said, I like to use them for details. In the old video, I draw lines in the eye to add some detail, and I do still do this on occasion. Feel free to play around with adding details to the iris. There are a lot of different ways to do it. To give the white part of the eye some more depth, I pretty much always add a shadow along the top of it. When I was younger, I would make this be a soft shadow. However, I now prefer to apply a hard edge shadow. I like the texture and overall appearance more. Also, I make the shadow slightly curved to help give a sense that the eye is a round shape and not flat. If I were to make the shadow be super straight, it would make the eye look kind of flat. Okay, so now it's time to add some eyelashes. I'm going to be honest, the eyelashes I drew in the first video are kind of horrible. They just look kind of odd. So I often add just a few eyelashes to my female eyes. They're all kind of a thicker shape that taper to a point. I also make them curve quite a lot. I try to be careful when placing them or with the spacing of them. Like, I don't want to have some that are super close together and then have one that's all on its own. In this case, I added 2 lashes on the bottom and 4 on the top. Feel free to add more or less based on what you like. Up until this point, my paper was taped down. However, I decided to remove the tape so I could move the paper around and let my wrist be more comfortable as I'm doing the finishing touches. I'm mostly just making things darker by pressing down harder on the pencil. Now I just add some overlapping lines for the eyelid. And we are done. Here is the finished eye. It's very different from the first video, that's for sure. Okay, so the next tutorial I'm going to kind of remake is my first ever hair tutorial. It was how to draw manga hair 3 ways. So I did film this traditionally, however the pencil I was using doesn't show up super well on camera. You can kind of see it, but it's also kind of hard to see. I don't feel like setting up my lights and recording equipment again, so I'm going to be drawing digitally instead. All of the info is still the same, I'm just drawing on the computer. In the video, I show how to draw a shorter hairstyle, a longer hairstyle that has the bangs swooping upwards, and pigtails. Before we jump into the 3 different hairstyles, I do want to give some basic tips for drawing the hair. It often helps to draw out the hairline so you don't make the space in between the hair extend too high or have the forehead be too low. I often draw hairlines like this. They kind of go in by the temples and taper down by the ear, and they're kind of flat on the forehead. There are other hairlines like widow's peak. This is the one I draw myself with. It goes down in the middle, so feel free to play around with different hairline shapes. What's also important when drawing the hair is deciding where the hair part is. Where the hair part is changes how the hair will flow because the hair will flow from the hair part. I tend to draw it as a slight curve since the head is round in shape. You can also kind of have the hair flow all from one point. I'll especially do this with shorter hairstyles that aren't parted because the hair will kind of all just flow from one point, kind of like my character Bryson. So let's jump into the first hairstyle. In the first video for the bangs, I made the strands I drew the same width, and I personally don't really like that. When drawing the hair strands, it's really helpful to use a variety of sizes. I like to have a mixture of larger ones and smaller ones. Also in the video, I say I add smaller lines within the large strands to make smaller strands. But the way I was doing it doesn't really look like that. Yes, you can break up bigger strands into smaller strands by adding some lines or details. But a lot of times you usually want them to come to their own separate points, not be glued together. Like this strand here could be 1, but I broke it into 2. Or sometimes I'll end a strand by having it have a larger and smaller point. I'll often include a few lines flowing from the hair part. In my head, I imagine those lines connect to the lines that I have drawn for the bangs, but I don't make them connect. You could make them connect if you want to, I just often prefer that they don't. I think it makes the hair look kind of fluffy. When I draw shorter hair, I often like to make it kind of bouncy and fluffy because it doesn't have much weight weighing it down, and I just think it's cute. If you want a more sleek or sharp look, you can use more straight lines. When drawing hair, I often use lines that are a subtle S-like shape. It helps the hair look really flowy. Like in this case, the hair goes around the head, then it goes in a little and kind of comes back out. I wish I could say I had a really systematic way for drawing hair strands and that I could tell you my exact reasoning for what I do, but I kind of just feel things out and do what I think seems the best. When drawing hair, I often think of it in layers. We have the bangs, we have the hair strands that are at the front of the head, then we have the hair strands that are at the back of the head, and then the under part of the hair. Also, the hairstyles I draw might seem fairly simple and like they needed more detail. For me, a lot of the details get added once I start rendering the hair, but we are not going to be going into that today. However, if you want me to update my hair shading tutorial, you can let me know. I do shade hair very differently than I used to. So here's the first hairstyle. It's definitely a lot more fluffy than the first one. The second hairstyle was longer and had the bangs going in an upward swoop. I feel like I made the swoop too pointy. Also, it looks flat because I didn't add lines along where the hair part is. Because I found hair parts very confusing, so I didn't really add them very much. And I didn't really know that they were a way you could help express that the hair is fluffy. So for this one, the hairline is very important since we actually see it. I draw the bangs swooping up and then coming down. A lot of times I will add a small strand to help things feel more natural. The part I always found to be trickiest with this hairstyle is defining the hair part. Like I said, I didn't really know how to do it. It can be tricky because you have to think of how the hair is going up. A lot of times I just draw a line coming from the hair part and kind of drawing it going up and then going to the smaller strand, and then another that goes to the bigger strand. Also, this time I decided to tuck in some of the bangs because I thought it would look a little bit more interesting. Something I want to comment on is that I make the hair taper really early in the original hairstyle. This makes the hair look kind of stringy. I now draw hair with pretty large shapes that subtly taper. You can draw hair with smaller strands. It's just maybe don't make them taper so high up on the strand like I did. It looks really unnatural. Like I said earlier, the hair part can help make the hair look more fluffy, especially if you have the space between the hair part be kind of deep and the hair really fluffs up from it. It gives us a visual of where the hair is flowing from and how much volume it has, if that makes sense. Also, you don't have to make hair have this much volume. This is actually kind of unrealistic. I just like really fluffy hair. For the underside of the hair, I usually just draw some lines, but you could also include some spaces in between the hair. I do add those sometimes. And now we are done. Also, I drew this hair parted on the other side because I wanted the curve to match my wrist. I didn't want to keep flipping the canvas on you. This last hairstyle is the pigtails. And honestly, the way I drew it the first time doesn't make much sense. It looks like I just attached the pigtails to the head. The hair doesn't look like it's going into the pigtails. So first I'm drawing in the bangs. This time the hair is parted in the middle, so all of the hair is kind of going to flow back to that point. Once again, I'm trying to use a mixture of larger and smaller strands to keep things interesting. Also, I don't want the hair to block the eyes, so I kind of draw them in a way that frames them. For me, the eyes are very important, so I try to not block them. So for drawing hairstyles like this, I think of them as being three parts. We have the bangs, we have the hair that goes into the pigtails, and then the pigtails. For the hair that's going into the pigtails, I draw a round shape around the head that is parted in the middle. Along where the pigtails are going to be, I add some bumpy shapes. This gives the appearance that the hair is being pulled back into the pigtails. I kind of draw the little bumpy shapes overlapping each other, and I have all of the lines flow into where the pigtail will be. I'm drawing the pigtails placed slightly on the back of the head, so the head and ears will overlap in front of them. They're not on the side of the head. You would draw them kind of differently if they're on the side and not slightly on the back. Once again, I'm using S-like shapes to draw the hair. It was interesting going back and taking a look at my old videos and seeing how things have changed. I've definitely learned a lot over the years. Not only about drawing, but also video editing, lighting, voiceover, and all that stuff. I hope this video was interesting and a bit helpful. I don't know if I'll be doing this again. We'll see how well this video performs. But if you all want me to do this again, you can let me know. I have a lot of old tutorials I can remake. So yeah, here are the final results. I had a lot of fun shading the eye. Like I mentioned, I never really done my digital shading style traditionally, so that was kind of neat. And we also have all of the hairstyles. I hope this helps you get some hair drawing ideas. And before we end, I want to thank my super amazing patrons for supporting my work. It means so much to me. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!